Hey everyone, it's me, Manic Game Girl. There are so many PlayStation games. Any idea you can think, there's a PlayStation game. I'm using PlayStation the way your mom did in 2003 here. With such a massive install base, enterprising development studios ensured no matter how you get your kicks, you're covered. Alright, we got the first two words of the title covered, but what does might be evil even mean? It's just a phrase I thought sounded funny. But I guess in my mind it applies to games that, especially with a bait and a twist, suggest a capacity for hostility and or obscenity that make me feel like the sole witness to a violent crime. Harsh juxtapositions, lonely environments, something or other about scary character models. Rumored curses, bust-a-move 2 box art. The PlayStation milieu is eminently geared toward these qualities. Rudimentary graphics and clumsy controls create all these cracks our minds fill with unease. The modern aestheticization of the original PlayStation is so singularly honed in on those traits that dudes are out here making YouTube videos about the Dyatlov Pass incident with draw distance fog. Like, nobody's making Croc-inspired docs about the guy who invented the polio vaccine. And yeah, there are as many PlayStation games as there are internet videos about PlayStation games, so let's be rid of the framing device. Yeah, keeping it loose, the normal stuff is the sorbet in this full-course dinner of the forgotten and the never found. Thanks for peeping under the rubble with me. Let's rock. It's always hard to know where to start with this kind of video. The first title I talk about bears such a heavy load. Often I have to do a second round of digging once I'm in the scripting stage to find one that's just right, compelling and distinctive, but emblematic of the video's whole thing. I can't get too deep in the weeds to explain the appeal, but I gotta have a substantial amount to say about it. After much consideration, TIZ, Tokyo Insect Zoo, will be the first to step up to the plate. Right from the opening credits, it's a whirlwind of disassociated images. In-game cutscenes cascade into gameplay with zero indication you're able to move or what you're supposed to do. Oh, touch the rotating shape-shifting screensaver orb, of course. Oh, it's a basketball, of course. Oh, it's an anime cutscene, of course. As quoted from the back of the box, amazing! The first game and complete fusion of the 3D animated movie. The development was handled by General Entertainment, we'll see another game from them much later, and animated by Pierrot, the studio behind Urusei Yatsura and Yu Yu Hakusho and a lot of other anime. I'm gonna wager a guess here and say that both teams were locked in offices on opposite sides of the fucking country, the way each hemisphere's tone and atmosphere are at constant war with themselves. The first hurdle I faced was how to have a regular interaction with another human. Wait, hold on, this is for my therapist. After way too long, I learned that all 4 shoulder buttons make the protagonist think different thoughts. Circle picks one. I don't believe anything deviates based on your choices. I could usually hear all 4 options before moving on, often more than once. Outstanding impulse control on this kid. Unfortunately, this makes the dialogue punishingly redundant. As you cycle through responses, characters yell the same things over and over, which gets worse as more characters are introduced. I have to imagine language comprehension would amplify this problem, though it's up to you if being left in the dark is preferable. It is for me, mostly. Lacking context, I relied on guesswork to make headway, which actually meant I Kramered into solution after solution with a bewildered, oh, okay, cool. Touch an abstract representation of a star, now it's nighttime, now it's anime, and now I'm back but the brightness has been turned down, and also I'm beating my big bug wings with the shoulder buttons until I fly into space where the music is tripping over itself. This method came crashing down around me in the piss desert, wandering endlessly across every inch of land at 10 to 12 frames per second. It's like Jerry, but nobody even strangles me at the end. It nearly took me the length of that movie to give in and tap out. As it turns out, the game's ending isn't so different anyway. Everyone freezes to death, and our isekai bug boy becomes a sekai boy once more. Awesome! Omitting the dialogue tree stuff, Tokyo Insect Zoos is the format a lot of the unavoidable oxymoron incoming, better known obscure PlayStation games around the English-speaking internet, wandering through spaces, and occasionally seeing a full-motion video cutscene. No matter where a game places you, moving a character in 3 dimensions is universally understood among people who play video games. Well, understood enough to cope with the fact that we hadn't yet agreed on how we should move characters in 3 dimensions. Dumpster diving in the era's annals, even in menus you'll find just about every conceivable control scheme. Why did so many people think it was acceptable to map the back button to triangle? Combine that with constantly swapping circle and X as confirm buttons based on region. Anytime I performed any action in any of these, it was with great effort. I mean this more literally in some cases than others. Like, one of the primary verbs in 2003's Hungry Ghosts is reaching, not unlike my videos. When you see an item on the ground, the perspective shifts and you have to hold down an input to slowly extend your arm toward it. Sometimes there are scary things that want to hurt you and you gotta withdraw your hand quickly. I've never played a game that feels like this. Every step you take through hell is labored, like you've got lead shoes, and you spend the whole game holding at least 4 buttons at once. You attack with the right stick, for God's sake. Man, that feels good, actually. In grade school, or whatever you call it, wherever you are, were you also given an assignment where you had to write out the instructions to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with as much detail as possible, make it essentially foolproof? I remember my 5th grade teacher, cool guy, one of the only teachers that was nice to me. He showed us Castle in the Sky and Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots, shout out. Spent like 2 days going through everyone's submissions, showing all the points of failure. I don't even think either substance ever made it to the bread with mine. Shameful. Hungry Ghosts is like a twisted version with a Kingsfield coat of paint, almost mockingly procedural. It becomes another part of the atmosphere too. Rather than breaking immersion, I started to accept that this was an inevitable part of being in hell. I'm assuming synthesized ambient drones are too. We have the singular vision of Tokuro Fujiwara and a staff full of other talented individuals to thank for this thing, the Ghosts and Goblins and Tomba guy. And hey, here's another game where moving around feels alienating from another unlikely maven of early-ish video games with ghosts in the title. Sonic character designer Naoto Oshima's Artoon brings us Ghost Vibration, yet another outlier in the studio's catalog of basically only outliers. Link's the Time Sweeper, Vampire Rain, Blue Dragon, the direct-to-DVD sequels of Yoshi's Island. There's hardly a unifying vision here, but even by those standards, Ghost Vibration manages to be a misfit. Another one with a really satisfying spear, or I guess more accurately a harpoon. You use this to vanquish the ghosts that inhabit a decrepit mansion, logically. You know, there's really only so many ways to lay out a video game mansion, huh? I frankly detest this man's Giga Chad Sigma Dorse face, but I like his game. It's got these fixed camera angles where all you do is push forward until a ghost is abound, then you're in first person to fatally frame them. In the on rails section, the camera moves with the character along a predetermined path that lends some cinematic flair. Flair understandably lost in translating the game to one of the Game Boy Advance's scant few tank controls and all survival horror jaunts. He's so tiny! I love seeing genres bent around the portability of its platform. They formatted a survival horror game for short play sessions and stolen moments in the work bathroom by giving it levels. Cute. If you're a huge fan of scary games on rails, might I also point you to Dark Tales from the Lost Souls, a glacier-slow QuickTime event experience purpose-built for a CRT on the floor that is lulling you into a hypnotic trance. For once, we've got a game whose graphics are more surreal than its intercut FMV sequences. All these images are so abstracted from what they're meant to represent. What about this conveys that you're a detective hunting down a killer in an amusement park on Christmas Eve? Detached is the word of choice, in that the objects you hold are literally detached from your body, just floating around as if you're more ghost than the ghosts tormenting you, but also in how you spend most of your time with the controller in your lap or on the floor just watching your guy trudge forward, only picking it up to hectically whirl the D-pad around whenever a QTE pops up. You don't get penalized for a wrong input just for not hitting the correct input in time. I think these 4 games are interesting to group together, as the means may be different. Fundamentally, literally, they're all walking simulators. Oh man, remember what a 4-letter word walking simulator used to be? It must be the shoegaze or mumblecore of its medium, the derisive term that catches on anyway because it happens to best communicate what the genre is. For those of you lucky enough to have avoided this very stupid moment in time, the 2012 release of Dear Esther was an epic-making moment when it received equal acclaim and admonishment for its ultra-passive gameplay. The player explores an island by walking. The polarized reactions that ensued furthered the defining of a line in the sand between nerds who played video games for the gameplay and nerds who played video games to experience media. The former faction saw Dear Esther as a warning sign that circa Xbox Live Arcade indie games were being phased out for pretentious, touchy-feely, twee bullshit, while the latter faction were off pontificating about the ludonarrative synergy of using your middle finger to press the W key while listening to the disembodied voices of sad old people. I'm looking forward to when fucking Gone Home gets its inherited nostalgia-fueled cultural reevaluation, long after anyone is listening to the aging millennials writing Substack or Medium articles about its shocking relevance to the now. I can't wait until we start getting throwback pastiches of What Remains of Edith Finch so we can have more games where you get to be a drowning child. To the Jean Dielman of talking about anime on the internet, most any art that calls into question what defines its medium is in alliance with me, even an uneasy one. That being said, holy shit, these games feel decrepit now. In the decades since their most salient ideas have been subsumed into the language of modern games, big and small, plenty of which prove more effective and more, well, enjoyable. When a medium evolves as rapidly as video games have, the revolutions stuck in the craws of generations past start to look real obvious real fast. What if you don't realize you're playing as the bad guy? Was a groundbreaking question in the Obama years, I swear, and I see contemporary games ask that question in richer, more challenging ways than at the idea's point of critical mass. And see, part of what made walking simulators practical for indies to develop was that they didn't have to model or animate any humans in the same fidelity as their environments, so neither had to be compromised to create a harmonious style. But as the parts of the past we escape to change, and as more and more Unity plugins lower the bar to entry, games carrying a similar DNA to walking simulators skew ever further toward the PlayStation look. Going on 30 years with this console, we all know a limited polygon count doesn't correlate to limited immersion or pathos. Even on the complete inverse, stuff like the boomer shooter revival has been holding the first-person torch higher than whatever constitutes as modern and mainstream. All that said though, while devs are fixated on texture warping and dithering, they gotta walk the walk and map looking up and down to the shoulder buttons. Merry form and function. Ever since I began making my living distracting people, the question I get most, second to
Have you seen Revolutionary Girl Utena?
Have you seen Revolutionary Girl Utena?
Have you ever seen Revolutionary Girl Utena?
Have you 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 seen Revolutionary Girl Utena?
is how do you find the things you cover on your channel? The answer is unglamorous. I just look at big lists and click on titles that sound interesting. I've honed my intuition over time, but there are some common pitfalls. Like, oh my god, there are so many visual novels on the PlayStation 2.
Dude, episode 3.
Deeply unscientifically speaking, from the mouth of a woman who had to retake Algebra 1.
Yes! Yeah! We're above 85!
Clear these guys. These guys.
Almost 15% of the console's library is made up of visual novels. The PSP was loaded with them too, part of why it's underrepresented here in favor of its overachiever, underperformer kid brother. God bless the Vita's scary, empty titty games. I love their gigantic areas that are always scaled wrong to the characters occupying them. They become ghost towns when there's no one else around. Just you and your girl's butt cheeks and the too tall buildings and or endless quarries. These games are all so hypersexual but completely unerotic. Not now, girls! Explode your clothes on your own time and stop making it my problem. I get that I'm not the target demographic, but from my experience, this is not what foreplay looks like. It's so beautiful these are what carry the torch for the mid-budget action game. I hope I don't sound reductive. Make no mistake, I like visual novels. Look, I can prove it. I own one of the Game Boy Advance Aerogay ports that doxes your IP address when you boot it. And all the more, that was the format applied to a vein of proto-Google Maps Street View travel simulators, which means I got to look at anime girls composited into real-life photos. Seeing screenshots of the Furaiki games in old Bishoujo magazines was an inspiration for this piece my friend Loveland Isle and I made for a music album of mine. Actually getting to play some, I legit felt seen. You play as a photographer going to an island. The first photo he takes is of a shipping container. Then you just walk along the streets and take in the sights. I spent a day last summer just like this, and it was the highlight of my year. Carefully, thoughtfully composed photography is very impressive and beautiful, but I think these are my favorite kinds of photos. Straight on, eye level, just capturing exactly what was in front of the person taking the photo. The protagonist even runs a blog, which means there's this great fake computer interface, a staple of games from the gradually turning millennium. This was a time where the internet was infantile and everyone had different ideas of the form it'd take. Not only does that manifest in game presentation, it also created a space for these little software applications that attempted to substitute the computer haver's experience. It's funny to think that as consoles have gotten more and more powerful, we used them like computers less and less. Your video game console plays video games and streams television, and that's pretty much it. There was a time when you may have needed like a PSP to look at web pages, kids. That wasn't a luxury I had as a child, though. Nobody in my life had the kind of Wi-Fi router, whatever, that I could connect to. It was a miracle I got onto the Pokemon Pearl global trade system by sitting on the roof of my grandpa's shed to steal the neighbor's Wi-Fi. For all the hours I put into Mega Man Powered Up, I never once got to play another Souls custom stage. But the future is now, and it was at the time as well. I can click a button and boom, I've got a save file with everything. 20 years later, I can play as Frog Raincoat Roll. This was almost cathartic, soothing something really deep in my soul. Okay, never mind, I'm glad I never downloaded this as a kid. The cross-media bar is the ultimate symbol of this bygone era of console as multimedia device. Sony gunned for this so hard to be the end-all be-all of controller and remote-based UI design that even this old Java-powered Blu-ray player uses it. In its heyday, it doubled as its own advertising. Each tab is like a big red arrow pointing to a different thing the device can do. But now, after support for these consoles has long since dried up, they are the amber encasing all sorts of TMZ video failed media services. It goes without saying that my Luddite ass cannot stand the state of modern design. Bland, no music, maximizing ad space anywhere they can fit it, and constantly shuffling shit around so you have to thumb through said ads to find the fucking HBO Max app. But before the smart TV-ification of UI design, even before the era of the cross-media bar, you could buy a disc that turned your PlayStation into a hyper-specific database, a TV tuner, a web browser, a sewing machine, a tarot deck, a cat encyclopedia. Hold up, that's my cat. We've got the Simple series to thank for those last two. The Simple series, a staple of these kinds of YouTube internet videos. D3 Publishers' vast catalog of budget titles that range from the expected to the definitely not asked for. Released only in Japan, unsurprisingly and evidently, the Noroi no Game, the cursed game, sets the stage for oh, this is busted, hold on. Developer Hunex bagged both J-horror actress Hitomi Miwa as a lead, and Schlocklord writer-director Tatsuro Kashihara, who penned the sound novel's 7-hour-long scenario. You can surmise from the title said scenario revolves around a cursed game, the setup and unknowing prototype for the classic creepypasta. All of you YouTube video watchers heartbroken you'll never get to hang out with your favorite YouTuber, think twice. Only tragedy can follow befriending a content creator. Our protagonist is the friend of a games journalist who gets a cursed demo disc. After her disappearance shortly thereafter, the game appears in the protagonist's apartment, and she makes the mistake of playing it. Clearly an influence on Sonic.exe. That's not true, but the Noroi no Game is playing with some familiar influences itself. You see, a child plays the cursed game, on her 8th birthday no less, and it's a ring-style race against the clock to release the curse. That cursed game is the Noroi no Game, being developed for whatever this thing is. And here is the studio where we spend much of our time, the studio in which the real The Noroi no Game was produced. Here's a poster for another Hunex adventure game. A free tip to zero-budget independent creators regular viewers are surely getting tired of hearing me repeat. If you incorporate the production of whatever you're making into the thing itself, you get to kill two birds with one stone. This is an ethos you see all over indie films, but I can't think of nearly as many games that do that. Like, here's some of the code making the Noroi no Game tick. Awesome. It's easy to overlook these sound novels when trawling for the scaries. Unless you're able to read along, you're flying blind between the visuals you can understand, but the Noroi no Game is stuffed full of so many FMVs, completing the game unlocks a mode that stitches all the cutscenes together into a movie. The PlayStation 1 has a cursed game of its own. Meet Yaku 2 Noroi no Game, the sequel to Yaku Yujo Dangi. I wouldn't believe for a second the Noroi no Game is cursed, but one screenshot from this thing, hell, the cover art alone, and I'm phoning my loved ones and telling them I'm on my way out. I am eternally grateful to Axe's Art Amuse for getting one Hideshi Hino on as supervisor. He's my guy, man. He's most infamous for working on the guinea pig movies, but his manga is where it's at. It runs on an unfiltered hysteria, as if existence is tantamount to agony. So exaggerated, it's balanced on the precipice of silly and horrific, scary in the way not being in on the joke is. Check out Panorama of Hell, and if you're into this sort of thing, Guinea Pig's installment Mermaid in the Manhole is most aligned with his manga. The dude is just obsessed with people painting with blood. Hino's style is fully represented too by these ghastly 3D models, as is his breakneck pace. Look, the cursor is panicking. You might think, if these reptilian shapeshifters are the people, how could the monsters possibly top them? Oh. Where the Noroi no Game is about someone investigating the Noroi no Game, Yaku 2 Noroi no Game is told from the perspective of an unwitting developer on the just a Noroi no Game. It also seems to connect back to the first game's plot somehow. I'm not really sure. It seems near every console was once the stage for an arms race to make its one allotted game about a cursed game, one of the more famous being Nanashi no Game. This one follows an investigation led by some college kids, and it similarly draws upon the J-horror classics, even features its own fake console, the TS. And I gotta be real, I think it's so awesome that they put jump scares on a console you can drop. Let it be known, Hazel endorses putting a wrist strap through the loophole on your handheld electronic devices, especially if you're a fucking klutz like me. Insane this isn't still a standard. Fucking $200 children's toy, and if you drop it once, you're fucked. Ridiculous. Don't even get me started on the directional pad. Alright, already. Hazel, this yucky Yuju dang it whatever is just a PlayStation game that looks like you ran it through the washing machine too many times. Okay, I'll give you your money's worth. Here are some actually, supposedly, cursed games. You know, I hold a lot of power in my hands as a person who makes YouTube videos. I could start insisting something like, Neopets, the Darkest Fairy, is a walk through the haunting, desolate husk of video game simulacra that many report infiltrates your dreams, and at least tens of people would lie about having experienced exactly that as children. It helps that there's precedent. Meet the delightful Toro Tokyu Jitsu, another game where you wander through photos of a rural, idyllic town and hang out with Toro, Sony's, at the time, kitty cat mascot. To the paycheck-to-paycheck, millennial-to-zoomer weeaboo, it's a surrogate vacation to the place where they make your favorite cartoons, but domestic gamers know this title for what lies behind a window in one of the backgrounds, only at dusk. A ghost caught in a photograph and immortalized inside their PS2s, gamers with internet connections cried. A believer though I am not, I struggle to rationalize what's on the other side of this window, because I don't suspect it's edited. Unlike Kamaitachi no Yoru 2, home of two separate ghostly curses, one in the opening sequence and one that will only manifest after 100% completion, in which you learn of a developer whose soul is trapped inside your and only your game disc. It's a whole rabbit hole that's not really my story. Other channels have covered this already. This one is less interesting to me than The Face in the Window, too. I think it's clever and cool, especially for 2002, but it sits within a selection of PlayStation titles staking claims they had haunted developments. Every Fatal Frame game does this. The first one even boasts it's based on a true story. Alright, guys. On this subject, I must shed my pride and prostrate myself before you all. In a video of mine, I believe the one about that dangly-haired little girl with the voice and the... I talked about a pet fixation of mine, Kawaii Shashin. At the time, I was under the impression a rumor about the game's development cursing the studio and killing some of its staff had been used to build buzz around the title, like the Fatal Frames. Story goes, the devs were uneasy about doctoring haunted photos. Some had breakdowns, others went missing, leading to the studio's closure. Except Media Entertainment made 2 more games afterwards. It turns out this is a literal creepypasta, posted to Knee Channel around 05, no doubt drawing upon the tall tales from the Fatal Frame devs. I am very sorry for this transgression, Kawaii Shashin. I hope you know I have a lot of respect for you. I like you. Maybe I even see some of myself in you. I spy with QuickTime events. Come on, what'll they come up with next? When you find a ghost in a picture, you punch in a series of inputs that's the same every time. That might sound like a cut corner, but it starts to feel more like practice than a test of your reflexes. I had fun getting progressively more consistent with them as I went on, but really I was in it to see all the different photos. Censored eyelines always freak me out, I don't know why. These must have been fun to make. I don't think I even need to say that ghosts are ubiquitous in, nearly synonymous with, Japanese horror, so it makes sense all the games I know of that have laid claim to curses or hauntings by vengeful spirits are from that part of the globe. But from my perspective, if there was one franchise that real ghosts would have a reason to inhabit, it wouldn't be Toro, or Kamaitachi no Yoru, or Fatal Frame, or even Kawaii Shashin. No, it would be a deeply American PlayStation franchise that will present you with the moment a life ended. Oh god, okay. The closest you'll get to seeing snuff inside a retail PlayStation game can be found in the opening sequences of the Cabela's hunting games. Yes, within 30 seconds of turning on your PlayStation, you're seeing real animals really shot and really killed. I refuse to take a stance on the ethics of hunting, this shit isn't my lane. Oh god, Dad, do I have to? You know, there was a time in my life where even as a curiosity, I would actively avoid a game like this. Merely the thought of simulating the murder of an innocent animal made me feel yucky. But I'm not the girl who prayed God would kill me as retribution for catching my first fish out on the lake with my granddad anymore. No. Early onset menopause is making me weird in new ways. I've shed my West Coast prissy pussy disposition, and, you know, I think this is the phase in my life where LARPing as some guy in rural Wisconsin is appealing. But worry not about this camo print trucker hat cutting off the circulation to my brain. I am still wildly offended by both the lack of an older woman character option and the inability to give your female character facial hair. I mean, that's just despicable anti-Italian American sentiment. Seriously though, you get young man, young woman, man, woman, old man. If you're a woman over 50 and you fire a hunting rifle, do all of your feminine, hollow bird bones shatter instantly? I kinda wish I was just making a video about these. One opens with an Aristotle quote before dropping you into making duck calls in the beauty of Pennsylvania. Like, what else is good there? But Alaskan adventures, man. It is legitimately serene, trucking through the elements accompanied only by your big cool gun and the crunching of snow under your boots. Drop the limp-wristed ruminations on game atmosphere. It's time to blast a polar bear through its fucking skull and claim your trophy. I think this is legitimately the funniest thing I have ever seen in a video game. I was completely alone in a dark room on Christmas Day when I witnessed this, and it practically knocked the wind out of me. Man, I was laughing like there were people watching. Probably my favorite thing about video games, from this era in particular, even the most immersive titles are incapable of disguising how aggressively video games they are. Your aim may shake. You may need to account for wind conditions and stalk your prey slowly and deliberately, but this polar bear corpse will still disintegrate when you touch it. I'm sorry to report, I did not die 7 days after I Cabela'd that member of an endangered species, so here, let's try this angle. My fellow Americans, do you, too, get a morose pleasure out of seeing depictions of the Twin Towers in pre-9/11 media? They're gonna be front and center in anything in New York with an establishing shot or a skybox, and after the attack in '93, speculative sci-fi guys were just assuming they'd be gone by the time we had nanotechnology. Then we got those unfortunate games released into the rubble, rushed back onto the operating table to remove anything that drew too many parallels to the attacks, or even had the Twin Towers at all. World Quack Center? That doesn't even make sense. And then there are the games released post 9/11 enough to feature the memorial site. I know the towers are easy meme fodder, but looking through these games as chapters in pop cultural history is, I don't know, it's interesting. As the aughts slink further into the past, as allure builds among those whose earliest memories were of only the lingering smell of its afterbirth, I've been collecting a mental list of 2000s scared straight programs to keep us from forgetting our history. For every Fruitager Arrow mood board, we need one for the 9/11 fever War on Terror video game canon. Urban Chaos Riot Response lets you feel some control over your nation's freedom by blasting through members of extremist groups by the hundreds. G4TV Man calls it
the right-wing neocon's wet dream.
But I beg to differ. The game is too cowardly to go full propaganda. According to its internal logic, the right to protest is unpatriotic, and reporting employees with suspicious-sounding last names is awesome, but you can tell they're steering around any ideology too hot button even in 2006's political climate. So whether or not the developers were bought into what's on the screen, the game functions first and foremost as Jingosploitation, and some remember it to be intentional, full-on parody, which makes it kinda likable in the way an idiot can be likable, but maybe that's helped by the gameplay being pretty fun. But Riot Response pales in comparison to 2003's Fugitive Hunter War on Terror, which takes a more incendiary approach to making an exploitation video game, capitalizing so directly on America's most wanted list that they're all in the game by name if you're playing the inherently more detached Euro release. I feel like I shouldn't even have to say anything. It's a console-sized Bush versus Bin Laden pop-up flash game. Every level ends with a fucking Dead or Alive style fist fight. Tip: Do a super combo when Fugitive's meter is flashing. Get this, the damn thing started development pre-9/11. What cocktail of emotions did the attacks evoke from the backwards hat-wearing developers at Black Ops Entertainment? Like, wow, this is a major tragedy and all, but is this free marketing? Did we hit the jackpot? Actually, I had an elaborate dream working on this video that Marlon Brando did some voice acting for this game, and in an interview with Electronic Gaming Monthly, he tore into the devs, which led to a quote that was, according to this dream, legendary, like part of the wider gaming mythos. I think it went something like,
"It was a job that would take 15 men 8 weeks to complete. So they hired 30 boys and were shocked when it took twice as long."
No matter how tastelessly provocative Fugitive Hunter's concept may have been, there's still a toggle to turn the blood off so mom doesn't get mad, because the ESRB's M rating probably should have just been short for middle school. In a Postal 2 type way, these games are too juvenile to allow them to offend, a microcosm of the impotence keeping so much aughts media from going as gritty as it wanted to, as its influences were.
She got a great ass!
Especially in an era where games teetered on the edge of government-enforced regulation. Unsolicited investment advice. Get in on the ground floor, kids. Give it like 6 months and Kane and Lynch 2 is gonna be the hot new unexpected critical reappraisal good actually game. In 2010, I had my hands full watching Naruto AMVs on my Nintendo Wii, so I wasn't thinking about it this way at the time, but holy shit, this is a video game that is inspired by, of all things, Liveleak. Without much narrative justification, the entire experience is seen through the lens of a standard definition handycam that was necessarily the look of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the footage broadcast on both the evening news and gore sites alike, coming from the people on the ground. I bought a mini DV camera a few years back, and on a spare SD card that came in the bag, there were photos taken of the war, literally photos from the POV of a tank, explosions going off in the distance. So even though Kane and Lynch 2 abstracts this association by placing its story in Shanghai, and by being quite silly, it's a successful reaction to what our image of violence was becoming in the digital age. And they seriously commit, too, incorporated all the traits unique to consumer-grade handheld video cameras. Give me just like 30 seconds to gush about this stuff, okay? When data on a mini DV camera gets scrambled, usually by hitting the camera while it's filming, this is what it looks like, and they recreate that when you get hit. When the auto white balance gets super overexposed, you see these green and purple chromatic aberrations around the edges where the light hits. It's kind of subtle, but it's here too. I'm not sure what it is, but these cameras have, I think, pretty unique lens flares, these vertical bars, and you get it, it's ever present here too. Most infamous is the unrelenting shaky cam, which goes insane anytime you run anywhere. That's pretty brutal, and I cannot blame anyone who gets filtered by it, but hey look, no, it's okay, look.
Hello?
When characters take phone calls, you hear that weird clicking sound microphones and speakers have when they're exposed to a cellular signal. It's not as common as it used to be, but that sound is burned into my brain. I freaked when I caught that. So yeah, I definitely don't want to give off the impression the game's bleeding American is an intrinsically negative trait. Not when we have 18-wheeler American Pro Truckers, an Outrun-type arcade title that, most excitingly to me, features real brands familiar to anyone who's ever driven on an interstate highway. This is the gamification of that one picture of America I'm showing on screen right now. We've got a running list of games that feature the Twin Towers, but what about games that feature Denny's restaurants? I already did that with anime, so I'll leave that one to someone else. In summary, some games are about games that make you die, some games are games that make you die, some games let you watch something die, and some games were made because the internet makes it really easy to watch people die. But some very special games are like unmarked graves. A record that something that once was is no longer, so gone not much more than a name survives. Japan-only Fox Junction is the sole game developed by the ungoogleable Trips, a bare-bones roguelike remembered solely for the cavern between the quality of its design and the pedigree of some of the involved parties. The title was sold on the marquee value of its big-name voice actors, composer Yuzo Koshiro, and character designer Keiji Goto, among others. And I mean literally, check this out. How did a tiny independent studio pull these talents together only to immediately fold? Well, sweep away all the dirt and debris on that headstone and you'll feel the traces of engravings. I took a shot in the dark and plugged trips.co.jp into the Internet Archive and boom, their homepage. It's real weird. Even by early internet, the website for your business is also your personal website to post whatever you feel like standards. Digging around, it sounds like their office suffered some water damage shortly before Fox Junction's release. I speculate that, combined with the upfront cost of the big names and its advertising, was likely more than the tiny studio could handle. These little games that could always lodge their way into my mind, impossible for me not to judge their efforts before their contents. As mentioned, the game likely couldn't aim very high, but what's there is my shit. Like, the 2 kinds of enemies are so ineffectual that I could focus on combing the maps for the exits without engaging. That's all I really wanted to do anyway, see the different dioramas till I had my fill, then dip. If I'd paid full price for this thing, I'd probably be pissed. That's the most fun I could have with it, but in video games, amble is my favorite verb, maybe in real life too. It's funny though that these levels all have verticality to them that the game hardly ever utilizes. Finding a bridge or something I could walk across practically gave me an adrenaline rush. It makes sense though, I'm sure the absence of a jump button saved everyone a lot of work, even though jump is probably my 3rd or 4th favorite verb. Each cut from Koshiro and his studio mates at Ancient either added to the atmosphere or clashed hard against it. That's where most all of its surprises lie. The PlayStation 1's life cycle represented the gawky teenage years of 3D platformer game feel, which mostly figured itself out in the PS2 era, only to be gradually phased out of the limelight by the PS3's heyday. That arc, I think, also reflects game developers mastering how to market to kids. At a time when nobody knew how important the little letter on the corner of the cases would be, studios had identified the PlayStation as the cool, kind of edgy console, but still held on to hope theirs would be the next big mascot. We now know that marketing to adults is always the best way to market to children, so these games feel somewhat like half measures. What the damn hell is this, man? What child thought this was cool? You can see this schism clear as day in the accidental duology of platformers about siblings who are trapped in their houses without their parents and have to fight manifestations of their nightmares. Gun to my head, funniest video game title of all time. Pippi and Babies, A Week of Garfield, Swagman. All I knew about this for years was the title and the cover art. I'm more than happy to make the reach to call this a 3D platformer. I was charmed by the chunky pre-renders and how they played with the suburban townhouse setting. Parting coat racks and stepping into this impossibly huge closet full of wooden crates. Good stuff. It remained funny to me every time they said Swagman, but that's a given for someone who is attending a public high school at the peak of the Flowrida administration. The other one we got here is 40 Winks, notably kiddier in tone, no transforming into big scary demons, but they don't skimp on the details. Game looks great, everything caked and baked in lighting, and the character models are really cute. I love their little South Park eyes. Gotta give thanks for the first person view. Unsurprisingly slippery, but I kinda liked that. At precarious spots, hopping around frantically, even as you slip down the edge, gives some leeway to make it to safety. Most important though, it's got a functional piano, woo! Hold on, what? The jewel case has a quote, "Move over Mario," from Nintendo Official Magazine, but it's a PlayStation game. Also, they got the name wrong, it's Official Nintendo Magazine, a British rag. Let's see, good news for RPG fans, Mother 3 is still in development, oh boy. This whole thing is move over Mario, back off Banjo. Awesome. As it turns out, the PlayStation release of 40 Winks is like a twin that absorbed the other in the womb, and it was originally being developed for the Nintendo 64. Oh, that's right, I've known about this since like 2010. Internet denizen Gorgie Rip uploaded a build of the unreleased but nearly complete N64 version in 2008, and this was the first and basically only thing I knew about it before now. 40 Winks is the gift that keeps giving to game preservation heads. Pretty recently, a Game Boy Color port was uncovered, one nobody even knew about. Cool! Next! When I'm playing a bunch of games for a video like this, I always wind up hitting upon one that I have to tear myself away from to keep things rolling. This go round, Deception 3 Dark Delusion was the one I kept itching to return to. Thankfully, I had one good excuse to. Humbling moment incoming. In these vast lists of video game names, I wind up grabbing a few based solely on the name alone just because it sounds like it might be a winner. Somato is a cool word. Sounds cool, has a cool meaning. Sure, I'll download that. It took me an embarrassing amount of time to register. This is one of them anime Looney Tunes femdom simulators. I gotta start over in English. Tecmo's Deception series is all about laying and activating traps to combat all manner of invading foe or villain. Going in, you pick some torture methods, run around the map leading your pursuers into their own undoings. There's this fun synthesis of good old tank control action and top-down strategy. Mapping out your traps so that they combo into each other gives you big damage and big money to buy more traps. It's awesome. Makes for a fun loop. Each environment has its own pre-installed devices, so you're incentivized to build around what's already in front of you. Although I wish there was a little more to that loop. You get dropped into a series of menus between stages, but like, man, give me a hub world. Give me Dominatrix Banjo-Kazooie. The first Deception has you playing as a man, but I think they pretty swiftly realized a torture simulator needs a different gaze, and I think every future title stars a female protagonist. When I played this in Japanese, I was just guessing at the plot. I had a hunch it was some sort of 70s grindhouse-style revenge plot, and yeah, in the first 5 minutes, the protagonist's mom gets executed in front of her, and then she's sold into slavery. Because being an underdog is necessary in justifying how bafflingly cruel you are. Once you've Rube Goldberg launched an enemy to be crushed by an extendo wall enough times, they start limping ineffectually. I just have to put this guy out of his misery so he doesn't have to bleed out from, like, his legs. Bring out the death pendulum. And then after the level, you get these bios for the guys you just murdered. These are some Dogville situations, bro. A game for people who unquestioningly wish death upon people. Irregardless of the framing, the rampant sadism makes this game unique and quite likable. And that's really helped along by how gorgeous it is. The turn of the millennium was an awesome time for games adopting cinematic language, where they've got all these dramatic camera angles and cuts, but it's still got that diorama feel intrinsic to the PlayStation. Clear simulacra. Sophisticatedly smashing action figures together. Easy comparison, but it was making me think a lot about Vagrant Story, probably the best looking game on that console. It's all the facial expression, bitmap, lip flap, gothic tone, sculpted lighting. Significantly more swag on Vagrant Story though, with its hot as shit sexually ambiguous villain with the Freddy glove. Still, Deception 3's cutscene direction is class, and marks a significant upward trend for the franchise's PS1 outings, from as far back as '96 to just a few months before the PlayStation 2's launch. Speaking from my lived experience, there's a certain loneliness, almost vulnerability, to being an early outing on a given video game console. The first few months after a launch are always those of relative quiet, other developers sheepishly eyeing your performance to see if they should even enter into the market you're helping establish, the tech still so young that you're often bound to be aged out of the cultural image of the platform's epic-making titles. Same goes for those at the end of a console's lifespan, the tragedy of having mastered the hardware and still getting left behind as everyone clamors for the newer, bigger, badder cutting edge. So yeah, let's look at some often overlooked early and late PS1 and 2 games. PlayStation 1, the launch period shortly after launch, brings with it all the staples. Clunky 3D kart racer with the Famitsu guy's ugly-ass art, pre-rendered 2D fighter with the worst application of blue screen you've ever seen, pachinko game with deceptively cool box art. Then there's Tama, Adventurous Ball in Giddy Labyrinth, the requisite physics puzzler that shows off the power of 3D at a blazing probably like 12 frames a second. Of course, the birth of the PlayStation is also the birth of FromSoft. It's pretty cool that convenient timing is to thank, the studio having already designed a game engine for commercial use that never properly launched. You know Kingsfield, I know Kingsfield, something mind-boggling graphics. I gotta be honest, this is all just an excuse to say the name Crime Crackers out loud. Love the big chunky portraits, but there's no way the HUD is this big for anything but performance reasons. You can't fool me. Late PS1 doesn't have a lot I find that interesting, actually. Sorry, lol. Jinx has Merkins, and Hellboy is a casualty of a post-Tomb Raider PlayStation landscape, and both got the Simpsons sheep treatment for the shiny, sparkly new PlayStation 2. And I suppose I'm no better. One of the stranger titles to jump ship from Nintendo in the transition to 7th generation consoles was Wetrix, a modest physics puzzler that was followed up by Aqua Aqua that, to me, unwilling to invest the time required to learn the mechanics, was utter chaos. Oh, hold on, the developers are British. The title must actually be Aqua Aqua. I liked Fantavision more, an abstract physics puzzler where your aim is to light up the night sky with fireworks. I like this fake city, South Island, with the palm trees and fake Space Needle. How about a launch title that never even made it to launch? One from the days when the PlayStation 2 was just the Station 2. It was never called that. Densun has been a long-time fascination of mine. A game about an office lady riding across rails suspended in the sky. Come on, amazing. No surprises this game came from the mind of the Umihara Kawase guy. According to him, it was announced prematurely, and if I'm extrapolating correctly, was subsequently not given enough time to reach shelves from its 3% completion state. I wonder most how this game's release could have affected the PlayStation 2's library. Keita Takahashi cites just seeing it as an influence on Katamari Damacy, whose quirky charm blew minds, similarly taking a grounded setting and injecting it with the fantastical. Maybe Densun wouldn't have changed much, maybe it would have acted as a landing strip to success for all manner of other eccentric titles, produced or unproduced. Maybe in that universe, Mr. Mosquito would have a greatest hits edition. Maybe in that universe, my dad would love me. That wasn't even in the script. That's not even a way that I feel. I don't give a shit about my dad. Okay, here comes the really wild one. Hope you're ready. Angara is the name of an experimental anti-establishment theater movement that emerged in the mid-1960s that was inextricably tied to underground filmmaking of the era. Angara is literally a portmanteau of underground. If you're into art house cinema, you're probably familiar, even if unknowingly, with some of its big names. Toshio Matsumoto, Seijun Suzuki, Shuji Terayama, arguably the most genre-defining of the bunch. This is a huge subject with a lot of nuance that I'm not really interested in wading into as someone who fairly recently had my "oh, so that's where all those things I like came from" moment with it. So I'll point you to this article from Angara Research Center. It's great, and it's linked on my website, linked in that box below this video that you might have forgot existed. To my novice eyes, it's hard to quantify what makes a work canonical to Angara beyond the artists associated with it. Mostly a know it when you see it thing, though I don't completely know it when I see it. Radical politics, pre-war iconography, sexual ambiguity, miscellaneous transgression, all good stuff. This is a movement that should theoretically be 1,000 miles and some 30 years removed from the realm of the Konami beat-em-up video game, right? Enter director and Angara alum Kaizo Hayashi, who was recruited sometime in 2000 to supervise a sequel to his 1990 film Zipong for the PlayStation 2. Supervise might be an understatement. GameSpot, I totally didn't say GameStop, claims, quote, Konami has given Kaizo control over the game's plot, action, and dialogue. In return, Seven Blades borrows much in the way of the look and style from Kaizo's Zipong. This is so awesome! It's so awesome I get to talk about this shit in a video game listicle. I have no ego about this. I got filtered pretty much immediately by the difficulty. It feels good, but it's unforgiving. The plot doesn't play around either. Pretty bluntly edgy stuff for a console whose most famous M-rated titles rely more on implication or abstraction from its most transgressive subject matter. Or just go full,
where's everyone going? Bingo?
And like the film it's expanding upon, it's indulgent as hell, cramming an absurd amount of design onto one little disc. One minute you're fighting a giant spider, then a big mech or suit of armor or whatever, then it's big stone gears with faces. Seriously gotta give it its flowers for being such an early PS2 title. It really doesn't look that far off from PS3 launch titles like Genji. So if you're into that one, or like Bujin Guy, or even Drakengard, this should be on your radar. It is the late PlayStation 2 titles I love most out of this little segment. We're not done with surprise connections to world cinema. Past the long persisting soccer and karaoke games, past the visual novel re-releases, past 2010 Higurashi Patchy slot lies the games produced for regions where the PlayStation 2 was never dethroned. Well past its time, the PlayStation 2 remained India's best-selling console. The country even got a semi-exclusive Slim model revision all the way in 2008. But we're going past 2008. 2011 introduced the PlayStation to Ra 1, a tie-in with the video game-themed film of the same name, at the time the most expensive film in India's history. This is forever the person writing about video games death trap. I have no blessed idea how to communicate to you how fucked up this game feels. I have been emulator dumpster diving since I was like 12, and this is beyond my comprehension. It's like they cranked a few sliders all the way to the max and let entropy take the wheel. You'll slip, you'll slide, you'll soar high in the sky, you'll get scared, it's Ra 1. It is oh so beautiful to me that we were blessed with not one, but two adaptations of Shah Rukh Khan films. In Dawn 2, the 2013 video game adaptation of 2011's sequel to 2006's remake of 1978's Dawn, you play as Shah Rukh Khan's kingpin crime man Mark Donald in a rollicking Max Payne John Woo Spanglehold-style dual pistol adventure, in which your biggest adversary is the camera's undiagnosed oppositional defiant disorder. You keeping up? Yeah? Good. I love this. Sauntering around a corrugated sheet metal wonderland and doing whatever this is to a hillbilly with a chainsaw. 2013! This released the same year as the PlayStation 4 and 2 years before they stopped making PS2s. It breaks my heart there aren't 100 of these. It breaks my heart there aren't new PlayStation 2 games coming out every day. FMV. It wasn't just a thing on the Sega CD, you guys. By the turn of the millennium, barring the Guy game, Western games had largely moved away from the live-action, full-motion video gameplay realm, no longer the novelty it was in generations past and incompatible with the kinds of games appealing to especially American consumers. Many Japanese studios, on the other hand, recognized that the DVD format allowed for new approaches to the formula with higher fidelity and more data capacity. It's a sad truth these games would have been basically impossible to localize within the standards and conventions of early 2000s video game culture, and that the resulting language barrier remains a hurdle most crate-digging PlayStation weirdos can't cross. I include myself in that camp, but my well-established bias towards standard definition digital video encouraged me to try anyway, and even understanding 2 to 5% of what was in front of me, I found so much to love. My approach with Japanese adventure games is simple. Pick the first option until I die. This principle did me well in The Fear, a camp horror fan's delight. Spread across 4 goddamn discs, I won't act for a second like I saw any more than the surface, but it makes a strong impression. This is functionally a found footage horror game from all the way back in 2001. It's great. It's got all the hallmarks of a low-budget production, intelligently baking its own production into itself, an efficient means of aligning form and content. Instead of capturing the development of its own game, it captures the development of its own live-action movie footage. The fidelity vacillates wildly between still photography backgrounds, compressed Betacam footage characters, and CG interactables, which creates such a homey kind of feel, sort of grounded, I guess. It's familiar and relatable. The game opens with a Bible verse. They have the Wikipedia sleep paralysis painting. As a schlock horror or whatever maker myself, I feel an affinity with the people making the game and the people making the movie in the game alike. Early on, the bald dude in a tank top gives the protagonist a horror knowledge quiz. The questions are pretty basic, but that made it feasible for me to score solidly, mostly scrambling for words I recognized and whatever was written in katakana to steer my answers. They're just like me, bro, talking about Suspiria while they should be working. That independent filmmaking ethos is a quality all of these FMV titles have to an extent, but it's stuff like getting asked what they ate for dinner in Eraserhead. It's tiny little chickens that made me feel especially connected to this one. This game will give you the fear. Tokyo Insect Zoo's general entertainment takes us to a trashier side of the FMV spectrum with Combat Queen, wherein honorary, weird, and kinda scary tokusatsu girls on rails fire away at big bugs that have reduced Tokyo to ruins. Another one that was too hard for me. You have a limited supply of energy that funnels into both your ammunition and health, and it felt pretty tight, uncompromising, especially since that energy carries over between levels, arcade style. Apparently later in the game you get full-on tank control survival horror segments. Sad to miss out on those, but the rail shooter stuff is all pre-recorded footage as the cameraman whips the camera around aimlessly. It's the premise of like every baby's first digital compositing experiment, and I love it. All the still photography is pulled from the book Tokyo Nobody by photographer Masataka Nakano. I have to wonder if this guy, who puts deep philosophical consideration into his work, ever had any clue that someday that work would have superimposed 3D models of gravure models running around in dollar store future combat fatigues. Alright, let's see, we've got Animal Death, The Twin Towers, Liveleak, Gothic Femdom. Yep, it's time to tick the final box on this checklist. A video game aimed at males selling itself with sex? You don't say. It should come as no surprise the cast and film crew behind Combat Queens are on the sexy to softcore entertainment spectrum. Can we get a running list of non-erotic video games that star erotic actresses? Right now mine just has Combat Queens and Magical Poppin'. Combat Queens was shot by workhorse cinematographer Atsuhiro Nabeshima, whose filmography is made up of the two indomitable strata of Japan's film industry: dime a dozen YA romance and pink films, low-budget softcore with often absurd titles like Political Lesbian Female Precept. For as long as there is an industry, there will be films in both camps, made for nothing and recouping just enough that more will always follow. As I was digging through the names attached to all of these games, I was waiting for credits in the latter camp to turn up. The Noroi no Games scenario writer helmed such classics as 48 Miracles of the Sex King and Urban Legends of Virgin Love. I've got to save my spiel about pink films for another time. I can only allot myself so many asides about genre film per video. Instead, let's roll the clock back a little bit to General Entertainment's illustrious debut on the PlayStation 2. It's awesome how at the turn of the millennium, these kind of cheap-looking, direct-to-video level productions could be framed as cutting-edge by virtue of being interactive. You might look at this and think forgettable TV drama, but in circa 2000 Sony's eyes, it was worthy of being one of the first titles consumers could play on their soon-to-be-released PlayStation 2 console, right alongside Evergrace at Sony's PlayStation Festival 2000 event. And it's fitting, probably more so than Evergrace, sorry. Because Love Story, written as Zero Story, indulges with abandon in all the ways the PlayStation could allow a person to interact with a story told in a serialized drama format. Adventure game timed decision-making, quick-time events, Tokyo Insect Zoo abstract orb gameplay. They turned shooting the rodeo into a Where's Waldo minigame. Nobody in these shots knew they were going to be in the launch title for one of the most popular video game consoles ever. All of these mechanics help tell the story of a young man who died in a motorcycle accident using his newfound spirit possession type powers to help a young idol navigate a treacherous world. And probably a lot of other stuff I ultimately could not discern because it is in a language I do not speak. Thankfully, when the game launched in 2000, writers for various game publications leapt to action to confirm whether or not the game would have been worth importing for non-English speakers. For the babies in the audience, in an era where Japanese games took long enough to be localized that you were left guessing if a game would even get localized, and in the console's infancy, the decision to ball out for import titles was a serious matter. The GameSpot write-up is totally genuine, but this IGN one, woof, add this to the Scared Straight program.
Just like my high school's production of The Sound of Music, some of the performances are better than others. It always bugs me how the girls are never looking directly at the floating embryo mass that's your on-screen persona. It's kinda like how Qui-Gon Jinn regards Jar Jar in certain Phantom Menace scenes. Oh, and despite the famous screenshot of the two girls kissing, Love Story features no girl-on-girl action. Your character simply possesses another girl for a little face-sucking action near the end of the game. Sorry.
Sad to say I couldn't find any of the juicy controversy that quote implies, but I love that a PlayStation 2 launch title features two girls kissing. I love that you can see the camera in the ass of this guy's shiny leather pants. I love that the angels wear Laura Palmer plastic wrap. I love the composition of this shot. I love when they show you the same thing over and over again from different camera angles. I love the random saxophone. I love that her hair gets in her mouth and they keep rolling. I love this. I love when the emotional, moody rain murders the compression algorithm. I love Love Story. I loved a lot of these games, but I guess I want to stay self-aware about that love. I'm limited to seeing most of them through a 5-foot pane of glass. Because of the language barrier, sure, but also the amount of time I spent with them, even going into them for the purpose of making a YouTube video. Predominantly engaging with what's on the surface, divorced from the contents of its mind and heart. The argument that style is substance has proliferated in this corner of the internet the same way weed-smoking colloquialisms have. But taking that notion on its surface runs a greater risk of forgetting that style and substance aren't mutually exclusive. Only engaging with the former doesn't compensate for lacking the latter. I know for the vast majority of you, this video and any others that cover it will be your only exposure to Love Story, and I'm mostly imparting what I gathered about its presentation, treating its other components as set dressing. Sort of backwards, right? I guess what I'm getting at is, the game's tactile and aesthetic qualities say interesting things about the time and place it was born into, but that's just what's easiest for me to understand and talk about. There's a lot to it that assuredly had as much care put into it that I can't and won't comprehend because my priorities lie elsewhere. So it's worth keeping in mind these are all incomplete assessments. And now that I've negated this video's existence, from the moment I started making this video, we had already all heard enough about the Piglet game. By the time this goes up, likely no one will even remember it was ever a thing, recalled only when seeing it behind glass for more money than your phone bill at a retro game store. But even Little Miss Contrarian and Slave to Exposure Aggression will saturate the conversation just a bit more to say, I think it signifies something really cool about the vastness of the PlayStation family's libraries and retro games as a whole. There are absolutely still more like it to find. Games that will ensnare the internet's attention, make them question how they flew under the radar so long. I'll spare you the agita I hold in my other hand about the bleak socioeconomic implications therein, because John Berger already taught us we live in a world driven by the intersection of image and commerce all the way back in 1972, so instead I'll say, have you guys played Magical Mirror starring Mickey Mouse? What the fuck is wrong with that game? Quick Hazel updates. My next video is a contractually obligated vlog about a weird opportunity I took to go to Portland for a weekend. I was originally gonna put it up on my second channel, but I feel like it's on par with the stuff I put up here, so don't get scared off by the fact it's the closest I'll come to taking any sort of sponsorship. Even contractually obligated is a misnomer. It was a super casual thing. I mostly made the vlog because I wanted to. You'll see. Then Penguin Video will make its long-awaited return with a new and improved edit. The first edit will probably go up on Patreon, or it'll be unlisted or something. I refuse to let any of you lost media fuck freaks die of a resulting conniption-induced heart failure. Also, if your favorite parts of this video were the parts where I read titles like Political Lesbian, Female Precept, I recently launched a podcast about the degenerate depths contained in the world of the pink film that might interest you. It's called Second Time Virgins, so named after the 1969 film. The first 5 episodes went up simultaneously to give people a chance to sample the different facets of this show, so check it out if you want. Thanks for your patience, and thanks for watching.